Hello, everyone. That's our poster that we're presenting at Child Language Symposium 2024, taking place in the Newcastle University. And we present a study titled Gesture, Prosody, and Sentence Imitation in Neurotypical and Clinical Preschool and Primary School Children. So imitation is the ability to intentionally replicate behaviors and actions of others. And it's ubiquitous in humans, and it lays developmental basis for language and cognitive skills. Imitation tasks have been very popular in the previous research. For example, sentence imitation task, in which the child is asked to repeat the sentence, is a very popular language screening tool in different children's population. For example, in typically developing children, it is usually incorporated in language assessment batteries, and it's considered to be a measure of individual variation in language acquisition. In clinical children, sentence imitation tasks have high diagnostic accuracy and in bilingual children, they are a reliable instrument for assessing children's language dominance. Gesture and prosody imitation have been also studied, but mainly in infancy, in smaller children, in babies. And we know that it's a driving force for language development. Different gesture and prosody imitation tasks, such as imitation of manual gestures, of facial expressions, of bodily actions, of speech vocalizations, are predictive of later language comprehension or vocabulary acquisition and early social skills. In clinical populations, gesture imitation deficits are linked to difficulties with language and social communications too. So different types of language-based imitation have been studied separately in the previous research. On the one hand, we have sentence imitation. On the other hand, we have prosody and gesture imitations. And in this study, we want to undertake different types of language-based imitation together and to study what we call multimodal imitation, which is a sentence, prosody, and gesture imitation all together. Our research questions here are: how do different types of imitation develop in typically developing children in comparison to clinical children, and how do they relate to different language skills, including both structural language skills and communicative language skills? So this study, we had 290 children, Catalan-Spanish bilinguals. 235 of them are typically developing children and 55 are clinical children. In order to be included in the studies, the children had to have a professional diagnosis or reported risk of autism or developmental language disorder. And the children are in two groups of comparable age, so the mean is 4 years, 11 months, and the range is from 3 to 6 or 7 years of age. So children undertook an imitation, multimodal imitation task. In this task, they are asked to simultaneously repeat the sentence and imitate gesture and prosody. It consists of a total of 12 pragmatically integrated items. Pragmatically integrated means that they form a story, they're related to one another, they're not just random sentences. And we have different types of sentences there. So statements, different types of questions, exclamations. All components of imitation, so sentence, prosody, and gesture, are evaluated separately. Each is given a separate score on a scale from 0 to 2, 0 being for no imitation performed, or if the child did something completely at variance, 1 if the child reproduced the component only partially, and 2 for accurately reproduced component. So here you have some examples, some pictures of children performing the imitation. First, the child sees it's in the video format, so first the child sees the actor performing the imitation, then the researcher, which is administrating the task, performs the imitation too, and then the child is asked to repeat it. We also had different language tasks, so we had a structural language, which was assessed via CALF, narrative abilities via retelling task, in which the child was asked to retell the story, and expressive pragmatics was assessed via audiovisual pragmatic test. It's a test that measures discourse production in different contexts. So in this task, the child is presented with different social scenarios and is prompted to elicit speech, and the elicited speech is evaluated in terms of social appropriateness. So now we come to the results. We'll present them separately for typically developing group and clinical group. So In typically developing group, we found that all imitation scores are positively correlated with one another. So if the child is better with sentence imitation, for example, he or she is also better with imitation of gesture and prosody. All imitation scores improve with age. And as for the association with different language abilities, all imitation scores are associated with complex oral language skills, so pragmatic and narrative scores. And as for the relation with structural language skills, only sentence imitation, but not other imitation scores, is related to structural language. In clinical groups, the picture is quite different. So first, not all imitation scores are positively correlated. We see that gesture is not correlated with sentence imitation. So if you imitate the gesture better, it doesn't mean that you necessarily imitate the speech better too. Not all imitation scores improve with age. Again, gesture does not improve with age in clinical group. And as for the relationship with different language abilities, not all imitation skills are associated with pragmatic and narrative scores. Gesture is not. And as for the result on the relationship with structural language, here we have the same, only sentence imitation is associated with structural language skill. We conducted a model with two groups, so group age and their interaction as fixed factors and item and participant as random factors. And we found a random effective group. So overall, typically developing children are better in this task than clinical children. An overall effect of age, so overall children improved with age. And interestingly, we found a group age interaction significant for gesture imitation. So here we see that only typically developing children improve their performance with age, but clinical children stay at the same level of gesture imitation as they get older. So our main findings are that we see, answering to the first research question, we see that there are different developmental paths of imitation in different child's populations. It's different in clinical and typically developing children. And what makes the difference there is actually gesture imitation, because we see that it consistently behaves differently in clinical children. First, it is not associated with other imitation scores. Then there is no improvement in gesture imitation with age, and we see no link with other language abilities. As for our second research questions about relationship with other language skills, we see that multimodal imitation is strongly related to pragmatics and narratives, so it's key for learning communicative oral language skills. And as for structural language, we see that it is related only to the verbal component of the task, so only sentence imitation. And we think that a possible explanation here might be that it is not a communicative task per se, as pragmatics and narratives are. So it relates only to this structural verbal component of the repetition of the imitation. As for the implications from the theoretical point of view, it provides us with new information which might be helping to understand the relationship between gesture and language and how it can vary in different populations. And it also shows a value of multimodal imitation for language assessment and treatment. So training using multimodal imitation can boost language acquisition process and help children to acquire complex oral skills such as pragmatics and narratives. And this is all for now. Thank you very much. And if you have any questions, you can email them to this email address.